Welcome to the Roadmaps Institute 2021-2022 Programs Guide. Roadmaps Institute assists organizations in building competitive advantage via world-class best practices and unparalleled collaboration. My name is Dr. Stephani Starling, and I'm the Executive Director for the Roadmaps Institute. The Roadmaps Institute, also called RI, was started in 2005 by me and several Raytheon executives. We did this in conjunction with academia, private industry, and the United States government participation. Over 200 companies and government entities have measured and utilized best practices documented in one or more of the over 20 world-class management step charts that I developed with the Roadmaps Institute and industry. Here, in fact, is a list of many of the companies that have worked with and utilized step charts and models that the Roadmaps Institute has put together. Let's start with what is a roadmap. This will be the first page of 4 pages introducing the Roadmaps Institute methodologies. Roadmaps are interlinked improvement projects an organization plans to do in the future. This is an example on the page of a roadmap itself. Each project or milestone links to more detailed information with activities and costs. So if you were to click in on one of these particular projects, you could pull up all the information and data that you'd expect out of something like Microsoft Project, with activities and resources and costs, as well as deadlines. Roadmaps are created from projects determined by Roadmaps Institute assessments. What we can do at the Roadmaps Institute is we can utilize best practices to help you develop your roadmaps within your companies. Roadmaps consist of projects, hundreds, if not thousands of projects that are interlinked and time-phased to be able to bring your company towards world-class over time and increase competitive advantage. You need a methodology that you can actually decide which projects are going to have the highest yield, and then decide which ones are you going to do within the next 1 or 2 years and which ones will you do between, say, 2 to 5 years out into the future. We provide a way to assess and find those particular charts. Here, for example, is world-class cost management. In fact, this is an assessment that we did in Los Angeles with a major aerospace industry company. In this case, the company rated themselves on a scale from 0 to 10 at a 4.7. Now, I'm not going to go into the weighting and how it is that we actually decide specifically what determines a yellow versus a blue or a green. That's getting into the weeds, so to speak, of assessing these step charts. But what you need to know is that this assessment allows us to measure where current state is and where we're going to go into the future. And of course, companies tend to want to go towards best practices and world class as long as there's feasible projects to do so that will have a good return on investment. At the Roadmaps Institute, we have over 20 best practices step charts. The first step chart that I ever developed was in a book that became a bestseller across the globe in academia and in industry. And on page 9 of the book was a step chart called World-Class Supply Management. From that step chart, the next 680 pages were about how to close the gaps between where you might measure yourself at current state and world-class. This idea became very popular within industry within the procurement and supply management field. When managers at higher levels in some aerospace companies saw what we were doing with supply management, they requested that I start to develop step charts in other functional areas and core competencies. So the next one that I developed was actually called World-Class Cost Management, then e-commerce, then quality. And we ended up getting up to 10 step charts that the aerospace industry ended up adopting as a model. Here, in fact, is the most well-known step chart that we have because it was the first one. Now, it used to be called world-class supply management, but now it's called world-class supplier management. And if you have a printout of this particular program's guide, you can actually grab 3 highlighters and score it up so that you can actually see with a quick and dirty analysis where you are in your company on the pathway to world class. This is essentially a table of contents. It has the RI programs at a glance. The main program that we developed at the Roadmaps Institute was DRIVE. DRIVE first stood for Developing Raytheon Roadmaps Integrating Value Enterprises. But once Raytheon realized that they needed to roll this out to 6,000 suppliers in their supply base, and in particular 200 or so that were alliance relationships, they felt they needed to remove Raytheon in the name itself. So I retained all of the intellectual property and now provide it to Roadmaps Institute under the name Developing Robust Roadmaps Integrating Value Enterprises. Let's start with the DRIVE program. The DRIVE program does what we call expanding efficient frontiers. If we look at the current frontier down at the bottom in the red, that's the frontier that you can reach by optimizing current knowledge. So if I went into a company and said, come up with a plan with some projects for, say, improving on world-class supplier management, without looking at any best practices, they would be limited to their existing knowledge. However, if I gave them that step chart, world-class supplier management, and we went through it, and we actually taught them what best practices were and worked with some professionals to discuss what best practices were and how they might apply within their company, they could reach the world-class frontier. This would require a step chart. However, beyond the world-class frontier, we have 2 more frontiers, and this is where it gets really interesting. We have what is called the enterprise frontier, and that's where we might have a company, like in the case of Raytheon, with 6 different divisions or separate companies, or a Chevron with multiple companies and divisions, or say IBM with the same type of thing. Most large companies have a lot of divisions. In any case, the enterprise frontier is where we assess the various divisions on the step charts they have selected. And we bring together those particular people, managers, to discuss how they might apply best practices at their organization, and then also how they might share their best practices they've already developed with those in other divisions. This enables us to get a much higher project portfolio return on investment. The highest level, though, isn't just dealing with the enterprise. It's going externally out to your alliances. So like in the case of Raytheon, they involved the United States Air Force, one of their customers. And they also involved various suppliers. And again, they had over 6,000 suppliers, so they selected a small subset of that were their true alliances. But interestingly enough, that was where most of their spend was occurring. Where DRIVE is a huge program and requires CEOs of companies to actually buy into it, this is at the simpler level, kind of the bricks that go into DRIVE itself. We call this the Management Assessment Program. And for a Management Assessment Program, there are basically 2 steps. You'll assess the organization and conduct a gap analysis, and then essentially write up those results of the gap analysis. I already showed you the assessment for that aerospace company in Los Angeles, where they measured themselves on world-class cost measurement. Here's another example of world-class supplier management in a company that was in the San Francisco area that analyzed themselves. So A map could be just looking at one step chart and doing the gap analysis and coming out with those results. A map could also be including several step charts. It really depends upon what the company wants to do. One of the most common types of maps that we do is the World-Class Supplier Management Program. So it doesn't have to necessarily be called a map. You can focus in on one step chart and we can build a program around it. In fact, this particular step chart had an entire master's built around it at the University of San Diego. It was an online program that still today, 20 years later, exists and is doing very well. Back when I was at the University of San Diego, in fact, I taught the first online supplier development class in the world. In that class, I realized that I needed to write the actual book for the students to utilize because there was no book on world-class supplier development at that point. This is another example of a step chart that was developed based upon necessity and a need that existed. And we built it into a class, and now we offer it as another MAP, Management Assessment Program, but focused in on just supplier development. Now we're getting into the programs which have multiple step charts. Lean to Green is one of these. While speaking with a dean at the University of Oklahoma about a program that we were talking about putting together for the United States Air Force, two things that they were really interested in at the Air Force was lean management and sustainability. And so we came up with a Lean to Green program that combines these two step charts, lean and sustainability, together. A key feature of this is doing the gap analyses, but also doing value stream mapping. And with the value stream mapping, we would do it in light of trying to create a sustainable system and to do things right for the environment. Another program which took multiple step charts but focused in on just one in particular the most was called POD, Process Optimization and Development. And in fact, here you can see some screen captures of this program being delivered to an oil and gas company. This oil and gas company was in my hometown, and I had the good fortune of knowing some of the top people in the company, and I worked with them actually for 2 years documenting their processes. We flow charted everything they did pretty much and looked for opportunities to optimize those processes and improve upon them. With me there, I was able to tap into best practices from the other step charts to improve their process. A major outcome of this particular project is they were able to sell their company for a very, let's put it this way, a very high profit for the principals involved. While I worked for a sustainability company as a vice president in San Francisco, AT&T approached me asking about sustainability. And at the time, I was trying to push the idea of diversity management, so I proposed to them that I put together a program called Corporate Social Responsibility. And corporate social responsibility for AT&T at the time included diversity management, sustainability, and outreach. I won't go into specifics of these particular step charts, just to tell you that this type of program is very much the type of thing that we try to do at the Roadmaps Institute. There's a lot of ways you can combine the particular world-class management step charts to create a program, and this was a terrific program. One of our largest programs is called Roadmaps Integrated Supply Chain. The first company that I worked with that actually I got the chance to apply step charts across their supply chain was Raytheon Company. And we had a lot of Air Force people involved in that, as well as some suppliers. What we're talking about when we're talking about integrated supply chain, we are talking about the value chain going from the Mother Earth, so to speak, of raw materials that might be extracted from the ground, all the way through to dealing with the life cycle of the customer. In the case of Raytheon products, the life cycle of the products could be 10 to 30 years. So life cycle management became a major issue in that. A program very near and dear to my heart also is this robust roadmap Six Sigma program. Six Sigma is something that got started when I was actually an undergraduate at Arizona State University. Motorola had started the program that became famous there, and then later General Electric, of course, brought Six Sigma more to the mainstream of American industry. But Six Sigma tended to fall after about 2004. And the reason for that is there tended to be a myopic focus on existing process that some companies were not handling disruptive technologies and leaps in innovation well. So while you might be able to tweak an existing process to make it almost perfect, making almost zero defects, that didn't necessarily help the company out if that product that was being produced wasn't even a product that customers wanted anymore. So companies need to be more agile. And one of the ways that we have approached this in addressing this particular issue is to utilize the world-class management step charts as a guide to finding opportunities for leaps and bounds in innovation and best practices. So when you combine robust roadmaps, working with your alliance members, working across your divisions, and then looking at world-class best practices, you're able to develop much higher return on investment for the projects that you select within your Six Sigma program, and you don't get caught in the situation where you keep refining a process which no longer needs refining. Another program we developed because of a need that happened was MAD. I know it's not the best acronym in the world, but it stands for Merge, Acquire, or Divest Program. In the case of companies that we work with, we try to work as best we can on proactive ways to increase market share, to improve the companies and improve the lives of people involved in the companies too. So we're not real fond of the idea of divestment, but we realize it's a part of doing business, and it's something that companies do need to be able to address. And our step charts help to address divestment. They help to address, should we acquire a company? And then also, what should we do when we actually merge two companies together or two organizations? Step charts help with all of this. Although there might be financial information readily available on companies, there isn't information on management capabilities. And the step chart assessments allow companies to be able to figure all that out. Another program we developed over the years was the 5-5-5 program. And 5-5-5 really represents 5 plus 5 plus 5, or 15%. This was a program developed for a large healthcare provider in the San Francisco area. This large healthcare provider was really focused on the bottom line and trying to, in the way they had been doing things, pretty much beating up their supply base to get cost savings out of it. We tried to articulate a different vision for them. And although adversarial relationships are part of doing supply chain management, you can develop alliance relationships and collaborative relationships. And that is the only way, in fact, you can actually reach higher level savings. You can see this with the tree down in the lower left-hand corner. We have what are called low-level savings, mid-level savings, and high-level savings. The low-level savings are the easiest ones to get, and that can be done with just a simple supply-based rationalization. The mid-level savings, though, are where you start to implement best practices and you start to find collaborative opportunities to improve. At the highest levels, though, these are delivered from projects that require substantial change, such as creating a supplier cluster or some other type of major investment. Another program, and this is actually a lot simpler than the others, but it tends to have to be done with upper management and companies. And this is the industry segment model development. And an industry segment model is one like I've already kind of discussed about like aerospace industry or say the telecom industry or other industries like automotive and mining and pharmaceutical, utilities. They can all essentially decide upon what are the core competencies that are most important to us to develop our companies and our alliances. And in fact, you can see a picture down in the lower right-hand corner of presenting the aerospace industry model to Raytheon Australia's supply base. On the left side, you can see an example of the telecom industry segment model that we worked on with Motorola, AT&T, and Alcatel-Lucent. Another program that I think is kind of fun is the mini MBA program. And really this started as a CEO of a company in Oklahoma City that was an oil and gas company asked me to develop some sort of program to get his managers up to speed on the world-class supply management step charts that he felt applied to their company. And so we selected 10 of those step charts and then each month held workshops to be able to go over them with these managers. That was about it. It wasn't really in depth. It was more of an overview and to make people aware of what there is out there. While I was a professor at the University of San Diego, we utilized step charts for several of our courses. We did the same thing while I was a professor at the University of Tulsa. And around the globe, my world-class supplier management step chart has been used within academia and in companies. These step charts have been used actually to create full-size, full-length university courses of 16 weeks. So like at the University of Tulsa, I utilized the world-class leadership management step chart within their College of Business Energy Management program. And it guided the way essentially for the curriculum that would be taught. Same thing at the University of San Diego with, say, world-class cost management. And in fact, in that particular course, we abandoned a traditional syllabus and actually used the step chart in the syllabus itself. So the objectives were developed essentially by gap analyses on that very first day that the students from industry showed up. And what they were able to do then throughout the entire semester was focus in on the gaps as learning objectives for them to learn and be able to take back to their companies and turn into projects for improvement. RoadmapsInstitute programs are really good at being applied within continuing education programs. There's really two different directions that continuing education programs exist, and that would be within academia, such as the University of Oklahoma outreach programs within their continuing education department, or within industry with the large companies themselves, like Raytheon had its own learning institute. And if you look down at the picture below, you can see a picture of me in the center with a bunch of LG managers. Now, I'm presenting as male in this because I gender affirmed in 2019, gender affirmed as female. But back then, I still presented as male. And at LG, they utilized several of my step charts during a week-long seminar to measure gaps between where they were and world-class best practices. They were pretty high up towards world-class, but they still had a lot of opportunities for improvement. And we went through those in that week. It was a wonderful time spending time with them over there and having the camaraderie and understanding between United States companies and what we know and what we could learn from Korea and then what they could possibly apply in their companies. Another thing we developed within the Roadmaps Institute was once we realized how we could roll up the data from our step charts and from our industry segment analyses, we were able to come up with indices. So if you look at this figure, you can see, for example, a couple of firms in the gray circles on the far left. If you take multiple firms who've assessed themselves on the step charts, and in particular we're able to do a full industry segment analysis, you can combine that data together for, say, Los Angeles as a metropolitan area where there's a lot of aerospace companies, and say San Diego and San Francisco, some of the major metropolitan areas with manufacturing going on. We could then take that and we could roll it into a state of California indice. And in fact, you can see that in this at 5.5. We could then roll that up hypothetically into the United States, North America, and even a global business capability index for the aerospace industry. I had limited data, and we were just starting to move forward with the business capability index when I created this particular figure. It shows 194 assessments that were done to arrive at the global BCI. 159 assessments for the North America, and then of course it decreases as you go back down to even the city level and state levels. But by rolling this up, we're able to get a comparison basis of where a company might be against other American companies or other companies across the globe. Another program that we have at the Roadmaps Institute that was developed really out of just us being interested in trying to develop it was called SOAR program. And SOAR is not available commercially at this point. We're still developing it. But effectively, it takes the same concept of step charts but applies them to our own personal lives. So here you can see the world-class wealth awareness step chart. And that actually goes through different stages of how you might be able to manage the money that you're making in your careers and in your life and try to increase it as much as possible by making the right decisions over time. So that's just one step chart out of 10 that we came up with that are essentially things that we felt were important for individuals to self-optimize with their own responsibility roadmaps. Well, thank you for watching this. I realize it wasn't the most exciting presentation to sit down and watch because it's programs and not everything would apply to anybody, any particular company. But we want to be able to develop some program for you, for your company. So please contact us. Contacting us is very easy. We have a Gmail, RoadmapsInstitute@gmail.com, and we see everything that comes in through there. You can also text the following phone number, 405-761-9808. Do not call that phone number. There is no answering voicemail. It only takes text messages, but it's a way to really make sure that you reach us and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you.